I didn't know I was unhappy with my life in the US until I left it. What started as 1 year abroad has turned into more than 10, and I can see now that my original reason for leaving the US is entirely different from my reason for staying in Europe. So if you're thinking about making a similar move, in this video, I'm going to walk you through why I left the US, what changed once I started living in Europe, and what I would do differently now if I were planning the move again. The first thing to understand is that I didn't leave with a clear relocation plan. I left with a feeling. I grew up in Texas, and moving abroad was not something I ever imagined for myself. Then, when I was 21, I took my first international trip and spent 3 months backpacking around Europe. At the time, I wasn't thinking about what it would mean to build a life in another country. I was just traveling. And travel gave me this feeling I hadn't really had before, like the world was much bigger than the life I knew. But when I came back to Texas, my normal life felt different. I finished university, started working, and tried to build the kind of life I thought I was supposed to want. And from the outside, there was nothing obviously wrong with it, but internally, I felt restless. I kept thinking about how much of the world I hadn't seen. And once I had experienced that feeling of being somewhere completely new, it was hard to go back to a life where every week felt like some version of the same thing. So when a friend mentioned a teaching program in Spain, I applied. Not because I had carefully mapped out my future, but because I wanted new experiences, to see more of the world, and for life to feel bigger than what I could see in front of me. And that's where so many moves abroad begin. There's an emotional pull before there's a practical plan. For me, that emotional pull was adventure. And I don't think that was a bad reason to start. Travel had opened up something for me, and I wanted more of that feeling. But looking back, I can see that adventure is not always enough to explain a move. Because if what you want is adventure, travel can give you that. You can take a longer trip or spend a summer somewhere without moving your life to another country. Moving abroad is different. You're not just choosing new experiences, you're choosing a different structure for your normal life. And that's the part I don't think I understood yet. So if you're thinking about moving to Europe, the first question I'd ask is not what country sounds exciting, it's what part of my current life am I actually trying to change? Because your answer changes the kind of move you should make. If you want mostly adventure, maybe what you need is a longer trip or a country that gives you easy access to travel. But if what you're trying to move away from is something like expensive healthcare, a high cost of living, or car dependency, then you're not just looking for adventure. You're looking for a different structure for your everyday life. And that requires a different kind of a decision. That's where people can get off track. They start with countries, visas, rankings, and videos about the best places to move, but they haven't actually named what they want their new life to solve. So the first thing I do differently now is get more honest about the real reason behind the move, because I want to move to Europe is usually not the full answer. The deeper answer is the life you hope Europe will make possible. And I only started to understand that after I arrived. Europe gave me the adventure I wanted, but what really changed my life was something else entirely. When I first moved to Spain, I thought it would feel like an extended version of traveling, and in the beginning, it did. There were new cities, weekend trips, and this feeling that even simple things had a little bit of adventure built into them. But over time, the adventure became less important than I expected, because when you travel somewhere, you notice the obvious things: the buildings, the food, the scenery, the feeling of being somewhere new. But when you live somewhere, you start noticing the structure of normal life. And in Spain, normal life felt better for me in ways I hadn't expected. I walked more, I spent more time outside, I saw the same people in plazas and cafes. And healthcare didn't feel like the same financial calculation it had often felt like in the US. But normal life was also harder in ways I hadn't expected. I had to get used to less convenience, different opening hours, slower processes, and the feeling of not always knowing how basic things worked. Even socially, I had to adjust. In Texas, friendliness felt immediate. In parts of Europe, people could be kind, but closeness often took longer. So it wasn't that Europe was simply easier or better, it was that daily life fit me better, even though it required more adaptation than I understood at the beginning. And that's what I think people underestimate when they imagine moving to Europe. Moving abroad is not about finding a country that is better in every possible way. It's about understanding the trade-off you're choosing. A place might give you walkability, more affordable healthcare, better public transportation, easier access to travel, or a slower pace of life. But it might also ask you to accept higher taxes, less convenience, smaller living spaces, slower bureaucracy, a language barrier, or a social culture that takes longer to adjust to. And whether those trade-offs are worth it depends on what you're actually hoping your life will feel like. So if you're thinking about moving abroad, I wouldn't only look at the parts that seem exciting. I would look more honestly at the trade-off, because a place can look very appealing from the outside and still ask more from you than you're actually wanting to give. For me, the things Europe made easier mattered more than the things it made harder. But only after leaving Europe did I start to understand why it might become something more than a short-term adventure. After my first couple of years in Spain, I moved back to the US. At the time, that felt like the normal thing to do. I had gone abroad, had the experience, and then I thought I would come back and build the life I was supposed to want. So I stepped back into that life that made sense on paper. But it didn't take long for the same feeling to return, except this time I understood it differently. Before I moved abroad, I thought maybe I was just restless. After living in Spain, I could see that it wasn't only restlessness. It was that certain parts of my life I was trying to return to genuinely did not fit me well. And that was clarifying, because until then, I still thought of Europe as a temporary chapter. But moving back to the US made me realize that Europe had not just been a fun experience. It had shown me a version of life that worked better for me. So when another opportunity came up to return to Spain, I took it. And over time, living abroad stopped feeling like something temporary and started becoming my actual life. And because of that shift, I can see how differently I would approach the move now. If I were making the move again, I would still let it be an adventure, but I wouldn't treat it only like it was travel. I would treat it like a life I was starting to build. I don't mean I would take all the spontaneity out of it. Part of moving abroad is always going to involve uncertainty. But I would think more clearly from the beginning about why I wanted to leave, what I was hoping to move toward, and what kind of place could realistically support that. Because once those pieces are clear, the practical decisions stop feeling so random. You're not just collecting countries that sound interesting or visa options that seem possible. You're starting with the life you want and then working backward into the country, the legal path, and the order of steps. And once you're clear on what you actually want your move to change, the next step is figuring out how to make it happen. So if you're at that point now, watch this video next.